everyone, thanks for joining us today. This is the deep dive into the FAFSA MEFA Institute webinar, our MEFA Institute series. We just launched it this year. It's a professional development series for school counselors, college administrators, and college access professionals. So we're glad to have you here today. My name's Meredith Barnhart. I am our Director of Communications here at MEFA. And with me on the line is Julie Shields-Rutina. She's our Director of College Planning and Education. So Julie might be jumping in if any of you have questions or if she wants to add something I may have forgotten. So you might hear her voice on the line as well. We'll go through the webinar. It will be about an hour today. All the details of the FAFSA and what you need to know as you guide your students and your families through filling out this very important financial aid education or application for higher education. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and type them into the question section of the GoToWebinar box. Julie might shoot you a quick answer, or if it's something we need to address at the end, we'll go ahead and go through those questions at the end. So you might get your question answered immediately, or Julie might jump in and answer your question, or I might. And if we don't cover it during the webinar, again, we'll go through at the end and answer any questions. How to participate. This is your GoToWebinar panel that you see on the screen. The microphone icon lets you be heard. We've right now muted everyone for the webinar just in case there's background noise or something comes up. So everyone's muted at this point. If we do a vote, we might not do any votes, but sometimes during webinars, we might ask a question just to get a feel for the room. So if I ever ask a question, you can click on that hand icon, and that's the way you can vote if I'm asking just for opinions or how everyone's feeling about a certain topic. You can see that your sound quality is on that panel as well. We do have handouts for this webinar, and it is a PDF of these slides. So if you go to the handout section on your GoToWebinar panel, you'll see that I've provided the slides for the webinar today. If you don't have a chance to download those, I'll go ahead and send those out later on today through email. So you'll all have those in your inbox later on today if you can't grab those right now. And again, if you have a question, go ahead and type it into that question section, and we'll go through those questions either throughout the webinar or at the end. For those who aren't familiar with MEFA, we're a not-for-profit organization. We've been around since 1982, and our sole purpose is just to help families plan, save, and pay for college. We partner with all of you, school counselors, college access professionals, college administrators, to help guide families through the college planning process. We do a lot in the community, a lot online. We have a very robust website, a lot of webinars and videos and blogs, really just to help families get through saving for college, college admissions, financial aid, and then even borrowing loans and repayment. Today, we're going to go through the FAFSA, as you all know, and the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. You may have heard of the FAFSA, and if you have, it's a very important application because it is the financial aid application required by every college and university. It is a free application, so students, when applying for financial aid for college, will fill out the FAFSA, and it is completely free. They should never pay a fee to fill it out. The website is FAFSA.gov. That now redirects to a longer URL that starts with studentaid.gov, but you can still have students type in FAFSA.gov, and that will always get them directly to that form. There is a demo site, fafsademo.test.ed.gov. I believe that is opening this week. So if you're a counselor or an administrator and you want to get a feel for the FAFSA before you help students go through the application, you can go to that demo site and actually go through the entire FAFSA yourself. It's very helpful. You get a feel for how the questions are asked and for skip logic, and it can just help you as then you're helping really answer questions from students and parents all about the FAFSA. As I mentioned, the FAFSA is required by every college and university in the country. This is how colleges and universities award federal financial aid, by looking at that information that families have inputted onto the FAFSA. And it's also how they award state financial aid. Many colleges also use it to award their own financial aid as well. So they're just using that FAFSA application. So it's very, very important for any student who's applying to college to make sure they fill out that FAFSA. It does become available on October 1st, so that's this Thursday. So for October 1st, the FAFSA will become available for current high school seniors. So seniors apply now to get their financial aid for next academic year, for when they're freshmen in college. We always encourage students to complete the FAFSA as soon as they can after October 1st. Some colleges have deadlines way in the future. It might even be January or February, but there are certain colleges and universities that really encourage students to apply for the FAFSA or fill in the FAFSA, complete the FAFSA as soon as they can, because they do run out of financial aid. So even if a student has a financial aid deadline that's months ahead of time, really encourage your students and your families to fill that out. They don't have to be there midnight on October 1st, but as soon as they can after October 1st, it's usually a good idea to go ahead and fill in that FAFSA. Colleges also have early action and early decision deadlines. So as many of you know, students can apply through the regular admissions process. That usually has a deadline, and we're talking for standard four-year schools of financial aid deadline, maybe January or February. But if you have a student who's applying early action or early decision to a college, their financial aid deadline might be early. It might be November 1st or November 15th. So that's important to note as well. And that's why really have students fill out that FAFSA sometime in October if they can, and then they'll pretty much know they've met all those deadlines. The FAFSA is an online application, but there is a FAFSA PDF online, which you can easily find. So if you want a printout of the FAFSA, I actually have one right here. It's helpful when you're answering questions from families because it shows all of the questions that a family might be asked on that online application. So again, you could just type into a web browser FAFSA PDF for the year 2021, 2022. That's the FAFSA that your high school seniors are completing. And you'll be able to find that FAFSA PDF. Right now online, it says draft, but that is basically the FAFSA that students are completing. There is skip logic throughout the FAFSA. So if you look at that online application versus that FAFSA PDF, the online application is going to have they're answering questions with their family. And if future questions don't apply to them, the online FAFSA won't ask the family those questions. So that's helpful. It's eliminating those questions that don't apply. The FAFSA does have to be completed every year, and that's something that a lot of families don't realize. They may complete it before freshman year of college and then not realize to get their financial aid every year, they have to complete the FAFSA. So if you're working with families, just mention that after they've left high school, they're in college, they're no longer working with you, potentially, they'd still have to fill out that FAFSA every year. One tip as families go through the FAFSA, if there is an answer that is 0 or doesn't apply, in pretty much every question, students and families still have to type in a 0. So let's say it's asking a family about their investments and families don't, maybe that family you're working with doesn't have any investments at the time. They do need to type in a 0 in order to move on to the next question. And then also important to note, as I mentioned, the FAFSA is required at every college and university, but some colleges and universities also require other financial aid applications. A popular one is the CSS profile. About 250 colleges and universities and scholarship agencies require that. So remind students as you're helping them, they need to fill out the FAFSA, they need to send it every school where they will potentially apply, but then they need to check the financial aid website at every college that they're considering applying to and make sure there's not other financial aid requirements. A few years ago, Federal Student Aid, who manages the FAFSA, came out with a new phone app or mobile app. It's the myStudentAid mobile app, and this is available on phones and tablets. Students can actually complete the FAFSA on this mobile app, which is great. So if students don't have a computer at home and they want to do the FAFSA and they have a smartphone or a tablet, they can do the entire FAFSA on this mobile app. They can also view their student aid report, which we'll talk about. That's just the summary of the information that they have put on the FAFSA. The students can also switch between mobile and desktop. So let's say they start a FAFSA with you at school, and then they want to go home and finish it on their phone. They're able to do that, which is great. They'll just log on and pick up where they left off. And students and parents will need an FSA ID, which we'll talk about, in order to log in to that mobile app. In order to complete the FAFSA, there's a few things that students and parents need to gather. First, if students have a driver's license, they'll need to grab that. If they don't have a driver's license or they can't find it, it's not mandatory. It's just another ID that lets college administrators kind of link the FAFSA to that student. So students are asked to put in their driver's license number, but again, there's not a problem at all if students don't have a driver's license and therefore can't input that number. And then students and parents are going to need a few bits of information. First, they'll need to put in their social security number. So students will need to put in their social security number and the parents, also everyone's date of birth, and then a lot of documents that have to do with finances. W-2 forms, federal income tax return, any untaxed income records. Students and parents are going to need to enter this information from 2019. So the FAFSA always looks back 2 years. So high school seniors will be completing the FAFSA for the 2021-2022 academic year. That's when they'll be a freshman in college. So that 2021-2022 FAFSA is going to ask for income from 2019, 2 years prior. So that's why we're asking from the 2019 W-2 and the tax return. And then families will be asked for their bank information, basically what they have currently sitting in bank accounts and investments. So they'll need their current bank statements and any investment or business records. There is FAFSA customer service. So here at MEFA, we're always willing to answer any questions that you have, or if students have questions, they're welcome to call us. But if you or if students have specific questions about their own FAFSA record, maybe they're not sure if the FAFSA went through, maybe they're not sure if they signed it correctly, anything specific to their own FAFSA, they should reach out to Federal Student Aid, to FAFSA customer service. So you see we have the phone number on the screen, 800-4FED-AID. There is an email form as well. So if students go through studentaidhelp.ed.gov, that's basically the help form for all of Federal Student Aid. And on that form, students can type in any questions they have, or parents can, and they actually send that through the website. It says it's an email form, but it's actually kind of a web help form. So students can fill in any questions and send that in. There's also chat available at different times. If the chat is not available, that option will simply disappear. But during working hours that we have on the screen here, the chat often comes up so students can chat and just type in their questions as well as parents. And you'll see there's a help icon throughout the FAFSA, and that will lead you back to this information. There's also some FAQs and a search and a link to contact information. So as I mentioned, the FSA ID is very important for the FAFSA. Both the student filling out the FAFSA and one parent need to secure an FSA ID. And it's very simply just a username and a password that students and parents will use to log into the FAFSA and to electronically sign it and then submit it. Students and parents can go to fsaid.ed.gov to get that username and password. And they can actually do that now. They don't have to wait till October 1st. So that is available anytime. Students and parents can secure that. And again, they do need to get this username and password to sign the FAFSA. So student and one parent on the FAFSA needs to do that. Students and parents, when they get that FSA ID, they'll basically just put in their name, some personal information to identify themselves. They'll have to set up some challenge questions just in case they forget that username and password down the line. It's similar to creating a username and password on many other websites. So here's where students and families will begin. It's FAFSA.gov, and right where it says start here, families will click right on that button. And this is what families will see on the homepage down at the bottom. The FAFSA basically collects deadlines for every state. So for Massachusetts, that's May 1st, but different deadlines, or different states, I should say, have different deadlines to complete the FAFSA. So if you scroll down on the FAFSA.gov homepage, you'll see this deadlines box, and that's where basically families can look up their own state's deadline. Lower on the screen, you'll see just some tips and some help from FAFSA, how to complete the form, go right to FAFSA help. And then if you're a renewal student, so let's say you're a student already in college and you're trying to renew the FAFSA, you'll click on that renew your form. And then once families have clicked that start here box that I mentioned, they'll get to this screen where they can log in. The family can either start as a student or as a parent. So really whoever is starting the FAFSA, and either the student or the parent can start the application. They will click on the appropriate box here, left on the student and then right on the parent. If students select I am the student, they'll automatically be asked to put in their FSA ID, their username, and their password. And so if the student is starting the FAFSA, they really have to go get their FSA ID at that fsaid.ed.gov website first, and then they can start their FAFSA by putting in that username and password that they created. If the parent is starting the FAFSA, they actually can go through the FAFSA without starting with the FSA ID. They will eventually need it to electronically sign the FAFSA at the end, but parents actually have the ability to go ahead and start the FAFSA. We would still recommend that every parent go ahead and get your FSA ID just to begin, just so you have it. But if they don't have it, they do have the ability to at least start the FAFSA with just putting in identifying information for the student and themselves. So you see for the parent here, when they click on that parent button, they'll put in the student's first name, last name, social security number, and that date of birth. There then is this disclaimer, just authorizing that, yes, I accept that I am who I say I am while filling out this application, and I will put in truthful information. So students and parents need to select accept there. And then they'll get started. They do need to select that they're doing a 2021-2022 FAFSA, and that is very important. Students that are in college right now, so they're in college for the 2020-2021 academic year, they're actually still able to fill in their FAFSA. So when students go to the FAFSA on October 1st, there'll be 2-year options, which can be a little confusing. But you need to tell your high school seniors, fill out the 2021-2022 FAFSA, because that's the year for which they're applying financial aid. And then if the students start the FAFSA, again, they'll put in their FSA ID, but if parents have started the FAFSA and they didn't put in their FSA ID to start, they'll be prompted throughout to go ahead and create an FSA ID. So you'll see at the bottom of the screen, it'll say, go ahead and create your FSA ID, because you're gonna need that later on to sign your FAFSA. Then families will be prompted to put in a save key. This is different than the FSA ID. This is something that allows parents and students, if they start the FAFSA and then they want to go back in and complete it, this allows them basically to jump in where they left off. FAFSA can be saved for 45 days. And so this is basically, it's like another password that allows a student or a parent to go back in. So they can simply create a save key and then proceed through. Families then get to this introduction page, and this is just some extra information from the FAFSA. Just some tips. How long is it going to take to complete it? Can I save it before I finish it? So anyone can click on any of these questions, get more information before they proceed. Wanted to point out some things. Once families actually get into that FAFSA, there are some options to click throughout the application. You can see at the very top in the center, it says View FAFSA Summary. Once families have started answering questions, let's say they're halfway through and they're not sure what they put for a certain question, they can simply click on that View FAFSA Summary, and everything that they've put in so far will come up. You'll see that there are tabs for every section. So right underneath where it says personal information for student, we have student demographics, school selection, dependency status, etc. Students can't jump ahead. They do need to complete each section, but once they're in a section, they can go back to a previous section if they'd like, and they do that by selecting those tabs. You'll see that blue outlined box where it says, because the FAFSA belongs to the student, you and your always refer to the student. And that's just a reminder for families. When they're going through, if a parent is completing the FAFSA, when they read something on the screen that says, enter your income or enter your date of birth, it's not actually the parent, it's the student when you're in that student section. So parents and students really need to figure out what section they're in, but they should assume it's the student that the FAFSA is talking to. At the top, you'll see save along the way. So the FAFSA will actually save your application as you go through, but families, if they're worried, if they've just put in a lot of information, they're only halfway through a screen, they can always click save and the FAFSA will save everything they've put in. And then you can see that help icon at the top on the top right. And again, that'll get families to that FAQs, to the search feature, and then to all that contact information. So here we're in the student information, and you can see that blue flag, student information. So students know when they see that flag, they're putting in their own information. Students will be prompted to put an email address and a telephone number. This is a really important reminder that students need to use an email address that they check often. They check the inbox of that email address often. So if I'm a student and I'm putting in an email address, don't put in an email address that is never checked. Maybe you created years ago and you never really look at the inbox, because federal student aid could send along additional questions or additional prompts for families to complete. So really, students need to be checking the inbox of that email address that whatever they input. A lot of families opt to create a family email address during this time that they use for all of college admissions and financial aid. They're definitely welcome to do that, but again, just have students check their email after applying for financial aid. Students will then be prompted to put in their mailing address. If they do select foreign country, they'll just have to put in all zeros for their zip code. So let's talk for a moment about who is eligible for federal financial aid. Federal financial aid, any US citizen may apply and is eligible. And then there are these pockets of eligible non-citizens. And this is all listed on the Federal Student Aid website. That's that studentaid.gov website. So if you're ever unclear, if you have a student and you're not sure whether that student is eligible, you can go to studentaid.gov and get all of this information. Eligible non-citizens do include US nationals and permanent residents. Those are probably the two biggest populations. And then all of these other students, anyone that has an I-94 or a T visa, and then a few other statuses. So again, for full definitions, definitely go to studentaid.gov, and that website will explain really who is eligible to receive this federal financial aid. This does not include undocumented students. So if you have an undocumented student, including a DACA student, those students are not eligible for federal financial aid. They might still fill out the FAFSA because perhaps a scholarship organization wants to collect that information to consider them for a private scholarship, but they are not eligible for federal financial aid. The citizenship of students will be verified either by the Social Security Administration for citizens and then the Department of Homeland Security. Remember, this is just for students. So as long as a student is eligible, it does not matter if the parent is undocumented or a non-citizen, that does not apply. So it's just the student has to be eligible in order to receive that federal financial aid. Students will be prompted when they start going through the FAFSA to answer some other questions that help determine their eligibility for federal financial aid. And students will be asked if they are a current high school student, if they've ever attended college. They should put they have not. So even if you have a high school senior who's maybe taken a course or two at a local community college, that student should still say that he or she has never attended college, because really that student has never been in pursuit of a college degree. Maybe he's taken some classes at the community college, but he should still select that he's never attended college. High school students should indicate that they will be working on their first bachelor's degree. Sometimes students get confused that they think a bachelor's degree is a high school diploma, but students need to make sure, high school students need to make sure that when prompted, they say, yes, I'm applying for financial aid and I will be working on my first bachelor's degree as I'm receiving this financial aid. They also need to indicate that they will not have received their first bachelor's degree before 2021-22. And again, just a reminder, let students know bachelor's degree is what you earn in college. That's very different than your high school diploma. Students will be asked at the beginning of the FAFSA if they're interested in work study. And for those who aren't aware of what work study is, students can earn money while working on a college campus. And it's part of a financial aid offer that students are given. If students aren't sure if they want to work while they're on college or in college, they'll be asked if they're interested in work study. Have everyone say yes. It won't take away from any other financial aid they'll be given. It just means that students, really financial aid offices will know that students are open to the idea of working and might award that student this work study offer. It doesn't mean that students have to work. It doesn't mean that they've lost out on other scholarship or grant money. It just means that they can then consider the option of working once they get to college. And males who are 18 or older must register for selective service. Selective service is that program that would be used if we ever again had a draft for military action. And males are defined as males at birth. So anyone who is a male at birth will have to sign up for selective service, and they can actually do that right through the FAFSA. Students will then be prompted to put in their high school information as long as they indicated that they are attending high school. If there is a student who indicated that he is being homeschooled, that student won't be prompted with this screen, but anyone else will have to type in high school information. And then once students have answered all those questions and gone through those screens, they'll be told, usually they'll get this prompt, that it has been determined that they may qualify for federal student aid. That really only means that the student is probably eligible for a student loan. They might receive additional financial aid, but at least they will likely receive a federal student loan to help them with those college costs. Students will then move through the application and select 10 colleges or universities that they wish to receive their FAFSA information. If students are applying to more colleges and universities than 10, that's totally fine. They'll have to put in their 10, they'll complete the FAFSA, they'll submit the FAFSA, and then about 3 to 5 days later, they can go back into the FAFSA, erase those 10 schools, and add their additional 5 or 6 schools, however many more they have. And again, these are schools that students are thinking of applying to. If students put in a school here and they don't end up applying for admission to that school, that's totally fine. That school will just destroy that student's FAFSA information once they realize the student has not applied for admission. So really, students should put on this list any college that they think they might be applying to. They'll put in their state, you can see on the screen, they can put in the city or the school name, and then a list of schools will pop up, and then students will select their school. So you can see at the bottom here, I had searched for Worcester in Massachusetts. Worcester State University came up, and then I would simply check that box to select that school and add it to my FAFSA. Once students select a school, this box will appear that says View College Information. And on this screen, students, once they click that View College Information box, they will get this larger box, and you can see we have Salem State University highlighted. And the highlighted screen will simply show some basic information about that school. The address, where it's located, their website, their in-state and out-of-state tuition, graduation rate, retention rate. So just some basic information about that college. Once students select their list of colleges, they will need to select their housing plan, whether they plan to live on campus in a dorm, whether they plan to live at home with their family, where it says with parent, or whether they plan to live in an off-campus apartment. Sometimes students aren't sure of the answer to this question, so just have them answer it as best they can. The housing selection can affect the student's financial aid awarded in some cases. Basically, housing does affect a student's overall cost. Schools assume that students that live in the dorm or off campus in an apartment have greater costs than if they're living at home with their parents. And if they have greater costs, that means they may be eligible for some additional financial aid. But again, have students just answer this question as best as they can. The FAFSA is going to make a determination of dependency for students. Students who fill out the FAFSA are either deemed dependent or independent. And in order for the FAFSA to determine whether a student is dependent or independent, they'll have to answer some questions. And the bullets you see on your screen are the questions they'll need to answer, or the topics of the questions. So students will have to answer questions on their marital status, whether they're pursuing an undergraduate or a graduate degree, their birth date, if they have any dependents themselves, if they have any children or dependents themselves, if they're military or a veteran, if they've been in foster care, an orphan or a ward of the court, emancipated minor, if they've been in legal guardianship, or they're homeless or at risk of being homeless. So students will be asked all of these questions. What's your marital status? What's your birth date again? Do you have any dependents? And as students answer the questions, the FAFSA will then determine if they are dependent or independent. If really none of these apply to students. If they don't have any dependents, if they're not an orphan, if they've never been in legal guardianship, etc., they'll be deemed a dependent student. And that simply means their parents will have to report information on the FAFSA. Any students who are determined to be independent, perhaps they are married, or they are pursuing a graduate degree, or they are an active military member, those students will be declared independent and they do not have to report parent information on the FAFSA. So that's the two differences between those clarifications. If a student is deemed dependent, they'll be given the screen that says, we consider you a dependent student and you need to provide parent information. So they'll need to click that. They will provide parent information and click next. If you're working with a student who doesn't fall into one of those independent categories, but for one reason or another can't report parent information on the FAFSA, perhaps they've been abandoned, they don't know where their parents are, or they do know, but there's a safety situation where they really can't be in touch with their parents. Those students will need to select that they are unable to provide information about their parents. And they'll be given more information about how to apply to be an independent student. Basically, if students can't report their parent information, they can go through a process and they have to communicate with every college and university to which they're applying and let them know that they can't provide parent information. They'll have to explain their reasoning, and each school will decide if they can do what's called a dependency override and declare that student independent, in which case the student does not have to report parent information. So again, that's a whole other process. If you have a student in that scenario, it's best to help that student reach out to each college and university and find out their process. What do they need to do? What do they need to communicate to that college or university to declare themselves or apply to be declared as an independent student? But for students who are reporting parent information, they'll then move into this parent information section. And you can see we're in the parent demographics tab now. And you will see that blue tab that says parent information. So then parents know this is their information that they're inputting. But again, as of today, what is the marital status of your parents? That is the parents of the student. So your parents means the parents of the student. So again, as parents are filling this out, they need to remember that the FAFSA is talking to the student. So who's considered a parent on the FAFSA? This is a big question for families. Parents are biological or adoptive parents and certain step parents. And this includes if parents are married to each other or if they're parents of a student, but those parents never got married to each other. Married parents can include same-sex couples. And if there are parents who are living together, but they do consider themselves separated, they should still select that they are married. In the case of divorces, you'll only provide information for one parent. So as an example, let's say I'm a student, my parents are divorced, and I live with my mom most of the time, and I see my dad on the weekends. Because my parents are divorced, I'm only selecting one parent to put on the FAFSA, and that's what we often say is the custodial parent. Who has the student lived with the most over the past 12 months? In my example, I've lived with my mom the most over the past 12 months, so my mom is going to be my custodial parent. My dad is my non-custodial parent. He does not appear on the FAFSA. Even though he's active in my life, I see him every weekend, my mom is the only parent on the FAFSA. However, if my mom is remarried, let's say I have a stepdad, my stepdad, because he's married to my mom, my custodial parent, appears on the FAFSA. So when reporting information about my parents on the FAFSA, I will put information about my mom and my stepdad. Those are my parents on the FAFSA. No information about my biological dad. So when parents get to this demographics information screen, they'll put in parent, social security number, last name, first name, and date of birth, and their email address. You can list the parents in any order. The FAFSA will say list information for first parent and then list information for second parent. And just make sure first parent and second parent always stay the same, but you can put parents in any order. If you see a word on the screen that is yellow and is underlined as we see parent on this screen, that means there's more information. So anyone can click on that word and they'll get really help about what is a parent on the FAFSA. So if students aren't clear about a question and they see a highlighted word in that question, have them click on that word and they'll get more basically instructions from the FAFSA. There are also help and hints throughout the FAFSA. So you see those white question marks in the blue circles. Students can click on those, and they have them after almost every question. So if students aren't sure, or parents aren't sure how to answer a question, they can click on that question mark and get more information that can hopefully help them answer each question. So parents will go through, put in their identifying information. Then they'll be asked to put in their household size. How many people live in their household? So families will select, or as they start counting, they'll include the student who's applying for financial aid, the parents who live in that household, the parents' other children. And this is even if they don't live with the parents, as long as the parents are planning to provide them at least half of their financial support in the upcoming year. So let's say I'm a parent, I'm married, and I have a high school senior, but I also have a junior in college. I'm going to include myself, my spouse, the student, and my junior in college, because even though my junior in college, he doesn't live at home right now, he's away at college, I'm still providing more than half of his support. I'm paying for his college tuition, I'm paying for his expenses. So I'm going to include him in my household, even though he's away at school. And I'm also going to include in my household other people who live with the parents and for whom parents provide more than half of their financial support and will continue to do so in the upcoming year, in the 2021-2022 academic year. So let's say, again, I'm a parent, I live with my spouse, I have a son at college, and then I have a daughter who's a high school senior. Let's say my parents also live with us. My household size would be 6. As long as I'm providing support for my parents, that would be the student's grandparents. Let's say I provide all their financial support, I'm going to include them in my household size as well. Then families will be asked to include the number in college. How many do they have going to college in the upcoming academic year? You'll include the student, of course, as long as they're going to go to college in the upcoming academic year. Even if they'll be less than half-time, you'll include that student. And then you'll include anyone else you want to include in that number in college. They need to be going to college at least half-time. So let's say I have another student in the household who's going to take one college class next year. I wouldn't count that student. I would only count the student that's applying for financial aid. I'm always going to count that student. And then anyone else in that household who will be in college next academic year, at least part-time, half-time. You do not, however, include the parents. So if I'm a parent and I decide I'm going back to finish my bachelor's degree, I am not included in the number of college, even if I'm paying for that bachelor's degree. Keep in mind that when families fill out this application, some colleges and universities will require verification or proof of everyone who's attending college. So if I fill out the FAFSA and I put there's 3 in my household attending college, the colleges and universities where I submit that FAFSA might ask for basically verification that all those people will be in college this upcoming academic year. Parents will then move into the part of the FAFSA that asks about their income, their tax return information. So this is where parents need to fill in information about their 2019 income. They'll have to put their completion status, their filing status, whether or not they filled out a foreign tax return. Parents often will be given the option to use the IRS data retrieval tool. And this is a fabulous tool because it goes into the IRS website and pulls in tax information for the parents and fills in that tax information completely into the FAFSA. That information isn't shown on the screen, but the screen will show that yes, if you click yes to this option to use this tool, we have gathered all your tax return information from the IRS. You don't have to fill it in, we already have it. So definitely encourage parents and students, if they're prompted as well, to use this tool. It just makes the FAFSA completion so much easier. This IRS data retrieval tool, as I mentioned, will pull in your tax return data. It won't show your tax data on the screen just for security purposes. Parents might be asked for a few more questions. If they had a rollover, they might have to answer a few other questions about that rollover, but really it's going to pull in information and make filling in income data super simple for parents. The parents that are married filing jointly will also have to put in basically their W-2 information. What did they earn from working? But that'll just be a simple question. There are some people who can't use this tool. So the vast majority of students, of families, will be able to use this tool. But anyone who married individuals who filed married filing separately or filed head of household, there's just a small pocket of people who can actually file head of household who are married, but there is a small population, but they won't be able to use this tool. If anyone changed their marital status after the end of that 2019 tax year, they've done foreign tax returns or used a tax ID number to file, or if they moved recently and their FAFSA and their tax return address don't match. All of those people won't be able to use the tool, but everyone else will. For those who aren't able to use the tool, they'll just have to type in the type of tax form that they completed, their adjusted gross income. So again, just have them refer to their tax return. If they can't use the IRS data retrieval tool, get their 2019 federal tax return, and they'll just refer to it. The FAFSA will actually refer to certain line items. It makes it really simple. So they'll say, go to line 12, fill in the information from line 12, right onto your FAFSA. They'll have to put in their salary information, income tax, and any exemptions. Once families report their income on the FAFSA, they'll be asked some additional questions, and this will subtract from their income. So these questions are actually helpful to parents. If they paid any of the categories you see on the screen, the FAFSA wants to make note of that because they know that some of their income was used for any of these expenses. So that includes if they paid child support. They want to take away any earnings from a co-op. They don't want to count those, or any earnings from work study, combat pay, any grants they received, or education credits. So parents, students, they'll be asked these questions as well. Then parents will be asked about their untaxed income. So again, first they're asked about their income that appears on their federal tax return. What did you pay taxes on? But then they'll be asked, did you receive income on which you didn't pay any taxes? And probably the most popular category there is your retirement income, or retirement savings, I should say. So many of us, we earn our salary and then we're able to take some of our salary and put it into our retirement account, and that money isn't taxed. So it's almost pre-tax money. On the FAFSA, that's called untaxed. So parents will need to report, did you take any money from your salary and put it into your retirement savings plan? That money didn't appear on your tax return because it wasn't taxed, but FAFSA wants to know about it. So again, parents will be asked about this. They'll be asked about IRA deductions, if they received any child support, any untaxed portions of IRA distributions, pensions. A lot of this information, even though it's not taxed, will appear on either the parent's 1040 tax return, on their W-2, and the FAFSA is going to help families gather this information. And again, there will be a lot of help and hints. Sometimes parents get a little confused on this section because it's a lot of words they're not familiar with, or they're not sure if they had certain income. But have them click into that help and hints section for each one, just to help them identify what this income is. A lot of parents don't have most of these categories. So if parents say, oh, I didn't have any untaxed income, that's fine too. And then once parents have reported all of their income, they'll go into their assets section. So often parents will, at the beginning of this section, be prompted with a question. As of today, does the total amount of parents' current assets exceed a certain amount? And basically the FAFSA has figured out here, if your assets are under a certain amount, we don't even want to count them. They're so small, we're not even going to use them. So parents need to think about their assets and answer this question. If their assets are under that amount, they can say, no, my assets don't exceed it, and they'll actually be able to move forward. But if parent assets do exceed that certain amount, parents will just say yes, and then they'll be prompted to enter in their assets, their cash, savings, and checkings, their investments, and any business. When asked about their cash, savings, and checking accounts, parents just need to report their current balance. So really, they can just look at their last statement. If they have a statement from a month ago and not the current statement, that's fine too. But it's just really the current balance. And yes, they can round up. Just give them the best, have parents give the best ballpark they can for reporting what they have in cash, what they have in savings accounts, and what they have in all their checking accounts. Then they'll be asked to report their investments. That includes real estate, not their primary home, but if they own a vacation home or any other real estate, rental properties. They have money market or mutual funds, stocks and bonds, and 529 accounts. And that includes 529 accounts for all the children in the family. Then families will be prompted to put in the net value of any businesses or investment farms. This does not include small family businesses. So there will be some description on the FAFSA, but if families have a small family business, they have a sole proprietor, really small business, they won't have to report the value. They'll have to report the income back in the income section, but they won't have to report the value of a small family business or a small family farm. But if they're an owner of a larger business, they will have to report the value of that business. And again, families on this asset section do not report their primary residence, so they will not report the home in which they live, any life insurance, any retirement account, so definitely don't report anything that's sitting in a retirement account. In the income section, they've reported what they put into their retirement account in 2019, but then they don't report the amount in their retirement account, that full value. So then students go through. So parents have answered all these questions for themselves, and then students will be prompted to go through and answer all the same questions about their income and their assets. Of course, students usually have much less information to report, but they'll still be asked to report all their income, their untaxed income, savings, checking, investments. Often this is zero for many students, but they still need to go through and answer all of those questions. If they did file taxes in 2019, they will be prompted to use that IRS data retrieval tool, just as the parents were. And if if students did not file taxes, but they did earn some income in 2019, maybe they had some babysitting money, maybe they mowed lawns and earned money that way, they'll still need to report that income that they earned in 2019. So then at the end here, families will sign and submit the FAFSA, and they do that simply by typing in their FSA ID. So it is really a simple process. All students who fill out the FAFSA get their FSA ID, and they'll need to fill it in and sign it. There might be a situation where a parent cannot get an FSA ID, and that would be if the parent is not a US citizen. Perhaps you have a parent who's undocumented. That parent will need to sign the FAFSA. So that parent is not able to get an FSA ID, excuse me, so they'll need to sign the FAFSA actually with a pen. They'll need to print a signature page, sign that signature page, and then mail in that signature page. So again, that's for parents who can't get an FSA ID. That's usually because they're undocumented, they don't have a social security number. So those parents will need to sign the signature page, mail it in. But most families, parents and students will have an FSA ID. They simply need to type it in, and then they submit their FAFSA. And here's the screen where you can click those options: sign electronically with my FSA ID, print the signature page, or you can submit the FAFSA without signatures. That means the FAFSA is not complete because the FAFSA does need to be signed, but you can submit it if a parent or a student is not able to sign it immediately. And then parents and students will get to this screen. This is basically their final screen. Student will be told, congratulations, your FAFSA was successfully submitted. On this screen, you'll see parents and students are given their expected family contribution. You see that on the right here. That is a number that is calculated based on the information reported on the FAFSA, and that determines what a family is able to contribute toward college costs for 1 year. It is always much higher than families think it should be. But when going through this demo FAFSA, the expected family contribution I got for the income and the asset information that I just made up when I put it in was $48,406. So that's the EFC that came out. Families will be given their own EFC. Colleges and universities are going to use that EFC to award financial aid to the student. So they'll calculate what they think the student can contribute, usually that EFC, and then they'll award financial aid based on that number. One great feature of the FAFSA is this question at the bottom: does your brother or sister need to complete a FAFSA? If I'm a parent completing a FAFSA and I go through and I complete it for a student, and then I have another student, let's say I have twins and I need to complete the FAFSA again, I can click on this, does your brother or sister need to complete a FAFSA? And it will carry over parent information into a new FAFSA. So I'll have to complete a second FAFSA for my other twin, but at least that second FAFSA will already have parent information in it, so I don't have to type it in again. I'll have to put just information for that student. You might be working with families, students who have special circumstances. And if a family's going through the FAFSA and there's information that they want the financial aid office to know and they don't feel like it was communicated well on the FAFSA, perhaps there was a change in their income or their household information, this is usually what we call special circumstances. And in that case, we encourage families to send a letter, an email, a fax to the financial aid office at every school, letting them know their special circumstances. This could be if a family recently lost a job. Maybe a family had really high income in 2019, and that's what's reported on the FAFSA, but family lost a job in 2020 during this pandemic. So that's something that they could communicate to the financial aid office. So loss and reduction of parent income or assets or student income or assets. There was a death or serious illness in the family, any natural disasters that have been affecting parent income and assets, any really high medical expenses the family wants to share, or if they have financial responsibility for other family members, perhaps elderly grandparents. Remember, if you have grandparents or other household or other family members in your household that you're paying for, that you're providing support for, you include them in the household. But many families are helping grandparents or other family members who don't live with them, and that might be something they want to mention to the financial aid office. So families have any circumstances they think the financial aid office should know when awarding them financial aid, they can send all this information to each financial aid office. They have to send it to every financial aid office. Financial aid offices love documentation, so any documentation that can accompany that letter or that email will be very much appreciated by that office. So what happens after students submit the FAFSA? The colleges that were listed on the FAFSA and their state will receive all of their financial information, household information that they submitted. Students will receive what we call a SAR, a student aid report. They'll likely receive that through email if they put an email address on the FAFSA. And that's just a summary of all the information they put on the FAFSA. Colleges that receive their FAFSA information might request additional documentation, such as tax data, asset information, verification of sibling enrollment at a college. And this is through, excuse me, a whole process called verification. Verification is something required by colleges and universities. They basically need to verify information that students reported, excuse me, on the FAFSA. So students, parents might be asked to submit additional documentation. And so remind students and parents if they get an email, if they get a letter from either a college or university or from federal student aid from the FAFSA, they need to comply. They need to send off any additional information that is requested. And then finally, colleges will send out those financial aid offers, typically in March or April. For students applying early, they might get them in November, December, but most likely students should really expect to receive those in the spring. Excuse me, there are some national and community resources for families to help them get through this financial aid season. Of course, MEFA is here. You as school counselors are often a wonderful resource for students going through the financial aid process. There's also FAFSA Day, and in the past, FAFSA Day was an in-person event. This year, they're holding virtual events. So students and families can log on to a FAFSA Day event. They'll go through a short presentation about the FAFSA, and then they'll be able to answer or ask questions and have them answered by financial aid experts. So financial aid experts will be on these FAFSA Day events. Parents and students can watch the presentation and then really type in any questions that they have. Financial aid experts on the other end will answer those questions for families. All of these virtual events are listed at FAFSAday.org. Right on that homepage of FAFSAday.org, families can scroll through, or you as school counselors can scroll through and see those events. And then Mass EdCo is a great organization in Massachusetts. They have educational opportunity centers where they help students, parents, really with the financial aid process. Right now they're having virtual appointments, but they hope to soon open in-person locations. But you can go to massedco.org right now and still receive assistance virtually with the financial aid process. So things that you can do as school counselors, college administrators, college access professionals now, we invite you to register for upcoming MEFA Institute webinars, and you can also earn PDPs through those webinars and through those lessons on our MEFA Institute. And again, this is our new professional development series. So if you go to mefa.org/MEFA Institute, you'll find all that information. We encourage you to share MEFA resources with families. So just as we have webinars for you, our school counselor community, we also do for families. So encourage those families to register for those webinars. Those are on our events page. Read our blog, watch our videos to get information about college admissions and financial aid this season. And you as counselors can go to mefa.org/counselors. That's our page dedicated to school counselors. We invite everyone to connect with us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And we also have a YouTube channel with a lot of videos. Our webinars are posted on that YouTube channel, as well as videos about all kinds of college planning topics. So that concludes the webinar today. This is our 800 number that you see on the screen, 800-449-MEFA. You're welcome to call that. Families are welcome to call that. And then we also have collegeplanning@mefa.org. That's our main email address. Anyone can send an email, and we're able to answer those emails pretty quickly. So if you have questions about the financial aid process or college admissions, we also love hearing feedback from counselors. So you can feel free to send us feedback through that email address, or on Google, you can leave us a Google review. So I'll go ahead and open the floor for any questions. If anyone has any questions, feel free to type them into your questions section in your GoToWebinar panel.
Hi, Meredith, and we do. We have just a few, but a few good ones that I thought would be good for everyone to hear the answers to. So one is, do colleges see the order that a family enters their colleges on the FAFSA?
That's a great question. So no, the FAFSA has organized it so that colleges do not see which order you listed. So sometimes families panic because they're typing in the order of the colleges maybe in preference, and then they order that the 9th college listed is going to think, oh, we were listed 9th. We're not really the student's preference. So no, colleges do not see that. Once you go through the financial aid process, and if you're applying for, or if you're eligible for Massachusetts financial aid, they will sometimes ask you to go back into your FAFSA and rearrange your order so that a certain college is listed first, but you'll be instructed to do so. At this point, all you need to do is list the colleges, or families need to list the colleges where they are applying, and families don't need to worry that certain colleges or universities will see themselves listed lower on the list.
That's great. And can you just say a little bit about 529 plans and how those affect the expected family contribution, how those are treated in this process?
Sure. So 529 plans are those college savings accounts that families can save for college in, and they are a parent asset. So if parents are saving for college for their child, even though that money is going to be used for that child, for the student, they are listed as a parent asset. So parents, when they fill in that investment question, they'll list the value of the 529s for all the children in the family. The good news with that is assets are treated much differently in the financial aid process than income. The financial aid, really that formula relies heavily on income. And the formula only assumes that about 5.5% at most of assets will be used for college. So we often say that assets are protected in the financial aid formula. So if families saved for college, that's good news. You'll list that 529 college savings account as a parent asset, and it's not going to have a significant impact on that expected family contribution, which is good news.
And Meredith, this is a good question, because sometimes this process can be so confusing. So someone asked, you were talking about special circumstances and how families could always write a letter and give more or email and give more information to the colleges. And this counselor asked, well, wouldn't the federal government want to know that too? So why wouldn't why wouldn't the family send information to the federal government? So maybe you can just explain why they wouldn't need to do that.
Sure, that's a great question. When families fill out the FAFSA, all of that information goes to the colleges and the universities, and the colleges and universities are responsible for awarding the federal financial aid. So basically, federal student aid, that entity at the federal government that has student aid for students, gives colleges and universities the responsibility of awarding their own financial aid, of the federal government's own financial aid. So when parents and students want to communicate something that they think might affect how much federal financial aid they should receive, they're communicating to the college and university, because that college or university is the one distributing the federal financial aid. So there's really an agreement between schools and the federal government that schools are taking on the responsibility of awarding the federal government's financial aid. So that's why you're communicating with schools directly. You're not sending anything to FAFSA headquarters or to the federal government. All your special circumstance information is going to those schools.
That's great. And would you mind saying one more, explaining a little further about, say, the example of having twins in college and how both of their packages would be affected and family contributions be affected?
Yeah, so if I'm a family and I have twins, I'm going to fill out the FAFSA twice. I have to do a FAFSA for each student. And then the financial aid formula is going to look at my family's information and calculate how much I can contribute to college, come up with an expected family contribution. Because there are 2 children in college, really that expected family contribution is going to be cut in half given to each student. So let's say I'm a family and normally my expected family contribution would be $20,000. Based on my family's income and my assets, it seems like my family could contribute $20,000 for 1 year of college. But if I have twins, the FAFSA formula recognizes, oh, but I have 2 students. So really the expected family contribution for one twin will be $10,000 and the other will be $10,000. So what the FAFSA formula does is calculates your expected family contribution, and then if you have 2 children, divides it in half. And if you have 3 children, divides it into thirds. So it's keeping it fair for those families that have more than 1 child in college at one time.
Thank you. And there's a question, and I didn't know the answer to this, so I'm not sure if we know, but if you mentioned that a parent isn't a US citizen and therefore isn't able to electronically sign the form, and so they have to print out and sign the paper form and mail it in. But this counselor asked if there are any other ways. Can you photograph that piece of paper and email it, or are there any other options for that? I wasn't sure.
Yeah, at this point, I haven't heard any other way. You would think in this time that parents would be able to take a picture of that and scan it or email it or send it in some other way. But as far as I have heard, you still have to print that form, sign it with a pen, and mail it into that address that will appear at the end of the FAFSA. So if we ever get notice, and I'm surprised actually there's no other way to do it, we would definitely send out that information that there's any other way to submit it. But as far as I know, it's still that somewhat archaic process where they have to print that page, sign it with a pen, and mail it in.
All right, and we'll just ask a couple more because we're past the 9 o'clock hour, but there are a couple of other good ones. Can you talk a little bit about if a grandparent is the owner of a 529 account for a student?
That's a great question, because we seem to see more and more grandparents helping to save for their grandchildren. So if there's a grandparent in the family and who opened the 529, owns the 529 for the student, you do not list the value of that 529 anywhere on the FAFSA, because it's really that grandparent's asset, and the FAFSA doesn't ask about grandparent assets. So you don't report the value. However, when the grandparent withdraws money from that 529 and uses it to pay for the student's education, in the year it was used, it counts as student income. So let's say we have a family, I'm a parent, we've got a grandparent and a student. I don't list the grandparent's 529 when I fill out the FAFSA for my family. But let's say in a few years, the grandparent puts money from the 529 toward the student's education. Let's say it's in the year 2021. In 2021, the student received money from that 529 toward his education. So in 2021, that student has income. Let's say it was $5,000. When the student fills out the FAFSA that asks about 2021 income, the student will report, I had $5,000 of income. Now remember, the 2021 income will be reported on the 2023-2024 FAFSA. So it's a bit confusing, but the best way to think about it is income is always a bit delayed. So we tell grandparents, if you do want to contribute to your child's, or we should say your grandchild's college education, wait till the later years of the student's college education, because by then that income won't appear on any FAFSA, because it would be a FAFSA in the future when the student has already left college. So basically, to recap, grandparent 529 accounts don't appear as an asset anywhere on the FAFSA. Once they're used, they count as student income. And if you ever have a question about that or need it fully explained again, just have the student or the parent call MEFA, Julie or I, or anyone really who answers the phone can kind of talk that through and explain it again.
Thank you. And I think we just have a couple more, but can you talk about the fact you talked about the order of the colleges on the form. The FAFSA instructions do say the order in which you list schools may affect your state aid. And I know we've heard that question a lot. So maybe you can just say a few words about that as well.
Sure. So basically, many states award financial aid to help students pay for college, and Massachusetts is one of them. And when you are eligible for state aid, the state needs to see that you listed a certain school on the FAFSA first. The good news is that you can change the order anytime. So for example, in Massachusetts, let's say a student ends up going to Bridgewater. And Bridgewater, if the student is at Bridgewater, the student applied for financial aid, and let's say that student would be eligible for some Massachusetts state aid. Bridgewater needs to see that, and the state needs to see that the student listed Bridgewater as their first college on the FAFSA. But the student can actually go back and do that much later, even after the student has already decided he will be attending Bridgewater. So at this point, when the student is listing the colleges, really the student can list them in any order. But then if the student becomes eligible, the student may be asked to change the order around so that that state financial aid can go to the appropriate school where the student decides to attend. So in our example, the student decided to go to Bridgewater. The state financial aid office and Bridgewater would say to that student, we need you to reorder those colleges on the FAFSA so that Bridgewater is listed first so that we get your information. It's really so that the college gets the FAFSA information and then the student can then receive that state financial aid. So if you're not sure, if students aren't sure and they want to make sure they can receive financial aid from every school, they can definitely reach out to the financial aid office and let them know what they did and ask the financial aid office, do I need to reorder anything in order to make sure I've gotten all the financial aid that I'm eligible for from that state, any state financial aid office.
So I think you covered everything very thoroughly. And oh, let's see, maybe one more question here. Yeah, just that the person asked if you're only applying to state schools, does that make a difference? But everything you said still applies in that case. So that's wonderful. Thank you, Meredith.
Right. Well, thanks everyone for attending. We'll send out this recording later on today with a copy of these slides. And if we did have a lot of questions, and I know Julie answered a bit, but if I didn't thoroughly answer a question, or if you have additional questions, do feel free to reach out to us. You can email that college planning email address and someone will get back to you today with any additional information that you need. And again, thanks for attending. We look forward to seeing you on future MEFA Institute webinars. So have a good day, everyone.